Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I'm the founder and CEO of Autism in Black Inc., where we aim to include the excluded.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. I'm very excited about today's guest who we have. As you know, I'm your host, Maria Davis-Pierre, licensed mental health counselor. And today we have Yovanna, who is here with us today, who is a speaker at the 4th annual Autism in Black virtual conference. Yovanna is a clinical social worker, so she's in my field, y'all, and I'm very excited. She is a transformational speaker, self-published author, confidence coach, and model. She is an honors graduate from Clark Atlanta University, where she obtained her Master of Social Work degree with a focus on health and mental health. Through her spiritual, mental, and physical practices, Yovanna has healed herself from the pain caused by trauma. And she has dedicated over 10 years of her life helping her clients become their best selves. Yovanna is also a fitness, health, and wellness expert and has been a certified personal trainer and Zumba instructor. Originally from Queens, New York, she is a first-generation Afro-Latina American. Yovanna loves food, fitness, practicing self-care, watching the Golden Girls, and documentaries. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia, is happily married with 7 chickens, 5 children, and 2 dogs.
Gotta mention the dogs.
Her 5-star rated book, The Many Gems in Your Crown, 7 Ways to Shine Brighter from Within, is available on Amazon. I am so excited to have you here. I'm so excited to talk to you. As we were talking prior to starting the recording, I am also excited about your workshop. So thank you for gracing us on the podcast, and thank you for being a speaker at the Autism in Black conference.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to meet you finally virtually. I've actually been following your page for a couple of years now. So I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to meet with you and to be a part of the podcast as well as the conference. I'm super excited too.
Me too. I want to go ahead and jump right in it because I know the people have been wanting me to cover more transitioning into adulthood topics. And one, I'm very glad that you're bringing that to the conference as one of our workshops. So can you share with our listeners how your personal journey led you to specialize in supporting young adults who are autistic?
So my oldest son, Pharaoh, was diagnosed when he was about 2.5 years old. And this is on the heels of the MMR causes autism, right, in the early 2000s. And so his sister is just 13 and a half months older than him. And, she's, neurotypical. Although she thinks she's neurodivergent, the older she gets, she's like, I think I'm neurodivergent. I'm like, probably. Aren't we all? And but I realized after having him, especially because I had just had her, how starkly different they were on the onset, like at birth. I was like, oh, this is different. And I'm a reader, right? I'm constantly educating myself, and autism really became like more of a, I don't want to say a buzzword, but people were talking a lot more about autism in the early 2000s. And so just kind of looking at all the criteria, if you will, it's like check, 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 check. And so I went to Miami Children's Hospital and had him diagnosed. And so at the time he was diagnosed with PDD NOS, so pervasive developmental disorder, non-specified. Now that has changed in the DSM, as you know, the terminology has changed. And I was like, okay, well, this is what we're doing, you know. I was a single mother at the time, did not have a lot of support. Actually, their father was very much in denial, and I think might still be in denial, 20 something years later, of his diagnosis. But it's like, we're just going to go from there. And so, unlike platforms like Autism in Black, there wasn't a lot going on, in 2002, 2003, 2004. It was just reading articles and things like that. And so we went from there. I just, had to do a lot of self homework. I did have a friend of mine, God bless her, Jennifer Strauss, who she was a special education teacher and advocate in Miami. And she really helped put me on to a lot of resources and things that were available at the time. And so I have to give her shout out and say I'm really grateful, because she really helped to create that initial foundation in terms of like an IEP, or different modalities to use with him and things like that. And so that's really where the journey began, and it's just really been building from there.
Perfect. And at the time, were you already in social work field, or did you do that after the diagnosis?
No, I did that after, but I think that I know that I am a social worker. Like, this is what, right? It's just I'm the embodiment of a social worker. Um, so no, I became a social worker officially on paper in 2013, and then recently got my graduate degree. But no, I wasn't working in social work, social services, or anything like that at the time. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so your son would be considered early diagnosis in at 2. My daughter was diagnosed, got her official diagnosis at 18 months. And I know that people, even though I say it was such a hard fight to get her official diagnosis, they're like, "Oh, but she was diagnosed so early." But when I'm explaining all of the hoops I had to jump through to get her diagnosed, I'm like, "Yeah, she may have been early, but it was truly because of the advocating
Yeah.
that I was doing." Did you
Yeah.
find yourself doing similar stuff?
I did. It was really more of a mindset thing for me, because your children. Like, we got to keep it a buck, right? We know what it feels like. We know. At least for me, I could say that I knew. The moment he was born, I'm like, he is different. He's
Yes.
different. Um and so it took me as long as it took me, because I was really trying to suss out, okay, is this him just being two?
Mm-hmm.
Because or is it more? And I knew that it was more, but I was like, let me give him the opportunity to be a 2-year-old, because I didn't know what it looked like on the other end. I didn't know, like, is he going to be medication? Is it like, I don't know what to expect. And so I wanted to kind of let him be a 2-year-old for as long as possible. But yes, it was certainly doing research and self-advocacy, and I was on Medicaid at the time, which is a conversation that a lot of us are not having, about the underfunding. And like I said, due to my friend, and she was like, go see this person, go see that person. And so I just happened to have like that blessing. But yes, we have to constantly be like, where is it? Where do I go? Who do I talk to when it comes to our children? And that is like the entire journey. It doesn't really change either.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I want to tap into some of what your workshop will be talking about specifically. If you guys want the full Yovanna experience, though, you will have to come to the 4th annual Autism in Black virtual conference, and you can get your tickets at autismblack.org/conference 2024, or click the link in the notes. But for you all listening right now, your workshop, which is titled, which I love them, Raising Them Autism in Young Adults, promises to offer insights into fostering independent self-advocacy and time management skills in young autistic adults. Can you provide a glimpse into your own experience as a parent of a young autistic adult, and how it has informed your approach?
Yeah, so I want to lead with, my son is a Libra, okay, and my husband is a Libra. And they each take their time processing information. And
Mhm.
they're quite often, my husband's like, I think that's more Libra than it is autism. And so we frequently have to reconcile, like, what is what, right? Like, what is him just being a boy, a guy, a male, right? A male identified person, and what is autism. So that is kind of part of it. But in that same vein, it was always very important to me because when I got the diagnosis, I immediately jumped to him being 18. And I was like, what is this going to look like as an adult? Like, okay, because I believe that they're born and they, we're raising adults.
Mhm.
They're babies and it's cute, but we're raising adult people. And so I was, my entire my intentionality with him always was him being responsible for himself. Like, just because you have this diagnosis doesn't mean, right?
Mhm.
Um, so always giving him like chores. You got to make your bed.
Mhm.
You got to put your shoes away. Come help your sister, wash dishes. And we can't diminish them by thinking like he doesn't understand. They understand.
Exactly.
And like any other child, they don't want to.
Mhm.
Right? And another thing is we have to find what works with us with them, right? So it's not a blanketed thing where it's like, well, Maria does this with her child, so therefore I should do this with my child. It's like, no, you and your child have to have that thing, that reciprocity, that experience with one another to build that trust with them. So he loves a schedule. I can set a clock. To this day, I can set a clock to him. I know when he's taking a shower. I know when he's eating his lunch. And so I foster that. I try to make things available and easy for him because I know that that's just kind of how he's wired.
Mhm.
Um, but I also don't just like let him just do and be. Like I have to put a little bit of fire under him. And all children need that. We have to remember that at the end of the day, they're still children, they're still people, and they're still going to be adults, right? And so that's how I've been able to do that with him. And he loves it. He loves the routine. He loves the structure. He gets to choose his own chores so that I know that he'll do them. And this is just what I do with all my kids. Like pick your chore and that's what you're gonna do. He has the one that's the least favorable to all the kids, but he's like a clock on it every night and I can count on him. And you know so I hope that that answers your question. But it's just really laying that foundation of having that communication, learning how your child communicates, and then meeting them where they are,
Mhm.
um, so you can have that cohesiveness in the family.
Yes. I know when my daughter was diagnosed, I was a very present focus. It was hard for me to even think about, well, what is it going to be like when she was 18? I automatically went to she's going to be 18 and but it was so hard to view her life at 18. A lot of it was because I didn't know any autistic individuals. I didn't know I was autistic at the time. I
Hmm.
didn't have that representation of, well, this is what it could be like. This is what you could see. And as you know, there's such a gap of resources in minority communities,
Yeah.
specifically in the Black community, that we don't have that representation, which is the reason why we started Autism in Black. But I know for a lot of parents, they're so present focused because we don't know what 18 is going to look like. We don't know, and things change. Who she was at 5 is not who she is at 11. I mean, there's
Yep.
things I would have never thought, that were going to be happening, but
Yep.
have happened, and I think a lot of times, sometimes I'll say, that really stops parents from, you know, instilling that self-advocacy in their children because they're so used to, let me do it, let me take over, let me just do this for my child, because they are not realizing that, even though we have disabilities, we should be learning these skills. So that's another reason why, what you said is that, instilling that he needs chores, or instilling that just because you're autistic doesn't mean you can't do something. And
Right.
I love when people say those things because it's so true. Yes, I have a disability, but that doesn't mean that I can't do A, B, or C, right? It
Yep.
may mean I don't prefer C. It may mean that it makes me take me a little time to do C.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that I will never accomplish C. So I
Yeah,
love.
or you do it differently, right? And yeah, you do it differently. And like to your point about how your daughter's changed so much, like my son was nonverbal until he was 8.
Mm,
And I was like, I didn't know that he would ever speak. I didn't know, or I have free thought, not echolalia, right? And we know that that's just the repeating of sounds and things. I didn't know, but I did know that I have to be mindful about what he's hearing And I have to be mindful about how I speak to him, because even if he's not speaking back, he's still absorbing. And we just have to be really, really mindful about, you know, our children's abilities,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and what they could be capable of, which I know is a very, very delicate balance, especially if your first child, or like you were saying, if you don't have a lot of representation of what that looks like, it can be really, really scary. And especially in our communities, right? Like, we don't like to talk about, um, disabilities. We don't like to talk about our children being disabled, but we absolutely do our child a disservice.
Mm-hmm.
And we do ultimately the community a disservice, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This episode of the Autism in Black podcast is sponsored by Amazon, our title sponsor for the 4th annual Autism in Black conference, and Grantmakers for Girls of Color, our gold sponsor for the 4th annual Autism in Black conference. Special thanks to Amazon and Grantmakers for Girls of Color for their sponsorship and making an impact. Now I don't want to delve too much into your son's business, because not here, he's not talking for himself. But have you had conversations with him surrounding his diagnosis?
Pharaoh is like, I am not like them. He's
Mm-hmm.
always been on this tip. Like, even when he was in his IEP classes and stuff, he's like, Mommy, I'm not like them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like them. Now, granted, the special education class that he was in had children with Down syndrome and CP and things like that. But even still, like, I try to get him to watch like Love on the Spectrum, because he is 22. And which, Love on the Spectrum, shout out to Netflix and shout out to the producers of that show, because you want to talk about like hope and representation, like that is just really phenomenal. But we want him to date, right? So we're like, you should go on a dating app, or you should watch Love on the Spectrum, or, you know what I'm saying, just like, and he's just like, I'm not like them, I'm not like them. So he knows that he has autism, but he even is just like, and
Mm-hmm.
so, like, this is who I am. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that for him. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely love that for him. But he is very aware that it can be a barrier for like employment, for example. It can create a barrier. He knows that it creates a barrier in communicating with other people. But he doesn't wear it. It's
Mm-hmm.
just who he is.
Yeah.
And I love that for him.
Yeah, and I think also, for me as an autistic individual, when I see certain media representation, I can't relate with it either, because
Yeah.
it's like, and we had a session on this at last year's conference, that a lot of times the media representation isn't truly reflective, especially of minority communities and what we have going on.
Right.
There is that disconnect there, so I can completely understand what he's saying when he says that, because I'm like, yeah, that's not fitting over here either.
Right. Right.
So I get that.
Hmm.
And when he transitioned out of high school, what was that like for you all? What was that experience like in your household?
So, there were some family dynamics outside of my immediate home that we had to contend with, to get him to move to Atlanta, which created some adjustment issues for him. So we had to kind of manage his adjustment issues. But he had a great transition. I mean, he graduated with honors, and not like special ed honors, like with honors in his high school. But my husband and I became his legal guardians. And even though my husband is a stepfather, we both
Mhm.
became his legal guardians, because we knew, as brave and as bold and everything like that he is, he's still very vulnerable in a lot of ways in terms of like society, right?
Mhm.
And the possibilities, just because of how literal he is, right? um and that's just kind of like how he presents. So we became his legal guardian. So that was a journey in terms of getting an attorney and hearings and all that good stuff. It was smooth, but it was still a journey. um and he lives at home, so he's an adult person living at home. He walks to and from work. He got a job like right after he graduated from high school. He's like, all right, cool. Yep. He's like, I'm getting a job. And our town here has restaurants and things like that. So he is independent in that way. He walks to and from work. The rain, sleet, heat, cold, doesn't matter. He's walking because that's his thing. That's his independence.
Yeah.
Right, as long as he's safe, and which has made it so that my husband and I, when we daydream about moving to different places, it's like, well, what about Pharaoh? We have to make it not easy, but make it accessible for him. Because one thing, for example, and I don't know if it's like this where you live, he qualifies for the disabled transportation here, but it is so unreliable. Like they have like left him, not picked him up late, and it's just like, oh my God. And but and so you know what he does? He calls an Uber. It's like, forget this. I'm just gonna get an Uber.
Because one
Um,
thing the Uber gonna do is pick you up. So
right, Uber gonna pick you up, right? And so that transition out of high school was smoother than I had initially anticipated, but I think it's because I had been kind of building and planning and seeing what was up and putting things in place. Um, so it was smoother than I expected, actually.
And how was it for you specifically? Because I know a lot of parents, that's a fear of theirs, because especially when, and I try to prep parents for this all the time, when you are so involved prior to them becoming an adult, in your hands, you're at the IEP meeting, you're doing all of this advocating, and now here they are adults, and it's like, okay, well, now what? So how was it for you with his transition?
Again, because I had always thought about this time of life,
Hmm.
right? So it wasn't as challenging for me as I'd expected. Also, he's 2 out of 5. We're a blended family of 5 children. So um I because he was more independent, and because we do things as a family, so it's like everybody in the family has to contribute, right? So it's like, well, he's gonna contribute, and this person's gonna contribute. So once he turned 18, and also because we became his legal guardian, so I have to say that for me and for our family, for him, that was one of the biggest, hugest sighs of relief. It was an investment, but it was a
Hmm.
huge sigh of relief because I knew that I can send him to the workplace, or I can kind of send him out into the world as a young Black man. And
Hmm.
so if something goes down, he's got somebody to come and cover him, and somebody who's accountable for him without interfering in his life. Just having that like legal foundation is huge, and it's always something that can be changed, right? Like if he matures and he decides he doesn't need a legal guardian or doesn't want a legal guardian, he can always advocate for himself. But that was a huge thing, so that for me really gave me the biggest sigh of relief, is just knowing that, like, okay, he's gonna be all right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then switching gears a little bit into talking about your clients, because I know that you've dedicated over 10 years of your life to helping autistic adult clients. So, what are some of the key strategies or practices that you have found effective in promoting those positive outcomes for young autistic adults?
So a lot of the clients that I've had have been mothers that have autistic children, and so I've been a support to the parents, to the mothers specifically. Um, Teaching them really about developmental stages. I think that, as a counselor, when you understand developmental stages, then I think it really helps you breathe a sigh of relief, because you don't know,
Mhm.
is this just him being a 9-year-old, or is this autism, or is this him being a 13-year-old? You know what I'm saying? So when you understand, and so I'm just really big on educating mothers, parents, but mothers specifically, on that, because mothers, we really take the brunt of it. We blame ourselves for our children's diagnosis. I know I certainly did for a while.
Mhm.
um and so I really try and be a support, an emotional support to mothers, and just and just say, like, just and that's with any child, neurotypical, neurodivergent, whatever it is. Learn your child and
Exactly.
parent your child the way that y'all need for you to parent your child. Because I feel like when we get into the need to do this,
Mhm.
because that's where we start to kind of get the stress, that's where we start to get the breakdown, that's where we start to get the anxiety and all the different things, right? The wear and tear that mothers experience because we feel like it's supposed to be a particular way. versus just doing it in the way that works for you and your family.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
I don't care if grandma don't like it. I don't care. Oh well, that this is what worked. This is, if they understood what it is on a daily basis, the minutia of that experience, they'd be like, "Oh, okay, baby, go ahead and do what you got to do." You know what I mean? Right. Like my son enjoys painting his fingernails.
Mm-hmm.
You think I'm gonna tell him that he can't paint? What? Like, on the grand scheme of things, right? And that's another thing too that I certainly talk to my parents about when I do coaching is, on the grand scheme of things, on a scale from 1 to 10, how devastatingly critical is this thing that you're stressing about?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
most of the time, it's gonna be less than 5.
Exactly.
And that really helps to take, I think, the pressure off of parents and also off of the child.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
think those societal pressures get us a lot, especially in the Black community, because there's the expectation of what it's like, what you should be doing if you are a Black parent, Black mother in particular. Like, you
Yep.
should be doing this, and this is the representation you should be giving. And oh, you're letting your son paint his nails. How?
Yes.
Why are you taking our good Black men from us? And da da da. All of that goes into it on the grand scheme of things, when it's just something I enjoy. You've put in your own perceptions into something, and now you've made it such that now I'm thinking, well, is it okay? And
Yeah.
like you said, you have to look at it on that scale of, on the grand scheme of things, who is it hurting? Is it hurting you? Is it hurting them?
No. Yeah. And also, and this is a bit of a sidebar, even though I think it applies to your question, like, we have to stop martyring ourselves. We have to get out of this mindset that's like, if I don't do it, it's not going to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we can empower ourselves by pivoting that mindset and say, well, if I teach them how to do it, even if
Mm-hmm.
they do it in their own way, it'll get done. And on a scale from 1 to 10, if they did it differently, how critically, devastatingly important was that? Probably less than 5. And so I think it's a mindset shift that all parents, but to your point, particularly mothers and Black mothers and Latina mothers,
Mm-hmm.
have to, because it's like, well, if you almost feel like you constantly have to carry something or carry your children. It's like, no, dude, like, you're raising adults, and we can't baby them and mother them forever. Of course, like, if your child is vulnerable, truly vulnerable, that's a different conversation, right? Um, but, and even then, if they're truly vulnerable, but they can tie their shoes, let them tie their shoes. They double knotted their laces, undouble knot the laces. Like,
It's so important. I know that one, for me, I'm just speaking for me, when my children have, because our oldest is 11 and she is super, super independent. And it just saves me a lot of time. I'm all about convenience. If she's over
yep,
here handling and doing what she needs to do, she gets herself ready. She's making her own breakfast. She fixes her own lunch of what she likes. I get to sleep in. So I'm like, hey, girl, do what you need to do,
do
right?
what you need to do.
Do what you need to do. But those are also skills that are going to be helping her in the long run, because she
100%, 100%.
yeah. So for me, I know that and I'll be honest here, I was very much so a helicopter parent when they were younger. I was, oh no, can't, oh no, oh, everything's scaring me, right? But as
Hmm.
they've aged, and I see that they're independent, and I see that it saves me time, or it saves me stress if I'm just going to let them go ahead and do it anyway. As I've grown as a parent, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this is a lot better.
Kudos to you, because that's huge. It's huge when you realize, like, oh, I can probably let go a bit, like, and
Mhm.
I think they might be okay. And then, like, trust yourself as a parent. Like, if I did what I was supposed to do, they're gonna be okay.
Exactly.
Like,
It's
they're gonna be
hard.
okay.
It's
Yes.
hard, because I'm
Yes.
very, my husband is completely different. He's like, oh, go find out the world and do what you do, type of thing. And I'm like, what are
Mm,
you doing? But
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, okay,
That's a balance, and that's nice.
let me slowly ease into this thing. But I'm seeing, especially as they're getting older, like, okay, girl, you're gonna have to let go of it. So I
Yeah.
really enjoy that you're saying we are raising adults. We're raising members of society, and we cannot
Yeah.
continue to hold them back just because of a disability.
Yeah.
So I
And
appreciate.
yeah, thank you. And it changes is the thing, right? Like, I mean, again, his sister's almost 24, and I can't parent her at 24 the same way I did at 16 or the same way I did at 8, right? She requires different things, and when she's 35, I'll be, parenting, quote unquote, differently, right? And so it's just a matter of like understanding that like it's an evolutionary process. And
Mhm.
everybody evolves. Like you were saying, like you grew, you evolved, they evolved, right? We grow together. And
Right.
that's the good stuff when you're able to grow together.
It is. It really is. And I know one thing that truly helped me was the fact that I am the age I am. I just turned 40 in January. And my parents,
Welcome.
thank you. But my parents still, well, my father still treats me like I'm like five. I'm like, sir, I am grown. I have bills. I have children, and I know that that is something that irritates me. I'm like, I don't want to do that to my kids. So I need to let them be their own thing. And I think my own experiences, because my dad is very much a coddler of me, and I do enjoy that at times. I won't lie,
Yes, it's beautiful.
but at times I'm like, sir, I'm 40. I am 40. Like, let it, I know how to call somebody about a bill, sir. Like, it's
Unless you want to pay it.
you know.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't want to do that to my kids. So that helped me as well, just thinking about that. So I love that you're very much so like we're doing this for our kids, and we all need to grow, and you are empowering parents to be able to do that, because it is
Yeah.
hard, especially if you don't have the support systems backing you up to be like, it's okay. It's okay
Hmm.
to do this. It's let them be free, you be free, empower yourself. So I love that you do that.
Thanks.
As we wrap up, what do you hope attendees will take away from your workshop, and how do you envision it contributing to their journey in supporting and empowering their young adults, autistic adults?
God, what a good question. That's a great question. The first word that comes, the only word really that comes to my mind is empowered.
Mm.
I want our attendees to leave empowered, to trust themselves, um, trust the process, right? And be intentional. And I continue to use the word intentional because I don't want to say, be strong, be stern, or be this, but our time is finite. And so if we're intentional about why am I doing this? What am I trying to gain from the situation? Like what is the end goal?
Mm.
Because it's easy for us to start spinning our wheels and start like looking left, looking right, like what am I? But if we can be intentional about where we're spending our time, what resources are we seeking out,
Mm.
you know, seeing what is it that your child needs and doing your homework, right? Like, okay, learning about, my child is 5. What are they developmentally, neurotypically, what are they supposed to be doing at 5? And how can I get them closer to that?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so just feeling really empowered, and grateful that there's so many more resources now, like Autism in Black, than there were, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah,
Even
and
7 years ago, because it was hard out in them streets.
yeah, and know that it's gonna be okay.
Mm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
gonna be okay. It's gonna look different phase to phase. Is experience gonna keep you on your toes? So buckle up, buttercup, and take care of yourself.
Oh, that's a huge.
Don't allow this experience, this diagnosis to burn you out. And I understand that every child is different and everything, but take care of yourself because ultimately our children with autism, but all of our children, they need us.
They do. They
So
do.
take care of ourselves.
You hit a lot of great points. I love that you say trust the process, because it is scary when you have to, put the faith in that process of, is it going to turn out right?
Yeah.
Especially parenting, because it's like, am I doing the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be okay. Trust the process. You will make mistakes, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. bounce
Oh yeah.
back from those mistakes. I'm apologizing to my kids on a weekly basis for things that I do.
And good for you for that. That's wonderful.
So we are going to make mistakes, even those
Yep.
who sit on these platforms, right? So I love that you say trust the process. And I also like that you say be intentional, because that's something that I stress, being intentional with your self-care and understanding
Mhm.
that what you see a lot of here on social media is not just going to be realistic for you to do,
Right.
especially in your households. What I do in my household is not a fit for everybody, right? But it works for our environment. Like you said, finding what works for your household and your environment. You
Mhm.
dropped so many gems today that I know our listeners are, one, probably taking so many notes, two, probably scrambling trying to get themselves a ticket so they can hear your full workshop.
Yes, I hope so.
Because it's going to be amazing. But also, where can listeners find you? Because I know that you have a book as well,
Yeah.
that's on Amazon. But where can they connect with you if they're wanting to hire you, if they're wanting to have you as a speaker?
Sure. Thanks, Maria. So you can find me on Instagram at Yovanna Rocks, YOVANNA ROCKS. I'm also on LinkedIn, Yovanna Madhere, MSW. Um, Working on a new podcast. I did formerly have a podcast called Funny Thing About Trauma is on all podcast platforms. And you can also visit my website, YovannaRocks.com.
Perfect. And we will have all of those links in our show notes as well. Thank
Awesome.
you, Yovanna, for gracing us. Thank you for being a speaker at the 4th annual conference. Thank you for being on the podcast. I'm giving you your flowers because
Thank
you
you.
are amazing. You are great. And thank you for all
Thank
of the
you.
gems you've dropped. So
Thank you so much. And thank you, Maria, for the platform.
yeah,
I mean,
thank
I really can't stress that enough. Thank you for the platform and for extending the opportunity. I'm so excited. I'm so honored. And I'm really, really excited. I'm really grateful for this platform. And I know it's going to be oodles of success. So I'm giving you your flowers back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank
Absolutely.
you for listening to this episode. I hope you've gained something. I hope you've learned something, and catch us on the next episode.
If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autisminblack.org/podcast. Don't forget to share your takeaways from the show on your IG stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find and share them. If you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community at facebook.com/group/AIBpod.